Hello, everybody. Today, we're celebrating the adoption of the UN resolution on addressing the challenges of people living with a rare disease and their families. This resolution, sponsored initially by Spain, Brazil, and Qatar, was finally co-sponsored by 54 countries and adopted by consensus by all 193 UN member states of the General Assembly on the 16th of December, 2021. The resolution recognises the more than 300 million people living with a rare disease worldwide and their families. It focuses on the importance of non-discrimination and advances the key pillars of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including access to education and decent work, reducing poverty, tackling gender inequalities, and supporting participation in society. Hello, everyone. My name is Tamsin Rose, and I'm the Senior Fellow for Health at the Africa-Europe Foundation. And today, as we celebrate the adoption of the UN resolution, I'm joined by a number of colleagues who are working around the world to advance the rights of people with rare diseases. And these are also the key figures who actually made that resolution a reality. And we're going to hear from them exactly how they made it happen. And I'm asking them to share their journey with us so we can learn from their experience. We have Anders Olausson, who's the chairman of the NGO Committee for Rare Diseases, Duran Wong-Riga, the chair of Rare Diseases International Council. We have Flaminia Makia, who is the executive director of Rare Diseases International, and Jan Lecam, the chief executive officer of Eurordis. Let me start by going to Anders. Where did this idea come from? The idea for a UN resolution. Give us some of the historical context of why you decided you needed to do it.
To understand why international and the UN is important, I need to go back to 1989 or in the late 80s, because then the interest of rare diseases really started to emerge in the Nordic countries in Europe. And in 1989, Agrenska was founded. We focused from the beginning on rare diseases, and it was quite early when we deducted that the latest knowledge for rare disease, for a specific rare disease, is somewhere in another country than Sweden, and it's moving. So if you're going to focus on rare disease, you have to go international. You have to work with that, another way to find the latest knowledge. When it comes to United Nations, if you want to work in international scale, then you have to work through United Nations. No better alternative to that. We also have something that is important when you come to the history, and that is to understand the timing. The timing came right in the beginning of the 2010 or 2011, 12, 13 or something like that, when we discovered that the word rare disease didn't exist within the UN system. So we decided that we have to do something. And with the great help of the Swedish ambassador at the time, John Eliasson, we ended up in the right organization to do something. And that was to come to the Congo, which is an organization that is gathering NGOs within ECOSOC who have a status at the UN. They work by setting up committees. So we became members of them, like open that door, and then we realized if we're going to do this, we have to do it together. So I called Jan Lecam, I called Duran and said, let's do something. That is the story.
Thanks very much, Anders. Jan, what can you tell us about your strategic approach to try and get this idea for a UN resolution actually onto the table so people could start discussing it?
Actually, the idea shaped around 2009, 2010, as Anders mentioned. I remember at the time spending my summer holidays doing my homework in reading books about UN system programs, and then starting to look at resolutions and understanding, okay, how can we navigate this big world for us, too big for us? And this is how we identify the ECOSOC and this committee of NGOs, and creating our own committee on rare disease within this committee of NGOs at the ECOSOC, within the UN system, as the vehicle for us to navigate the UN system while we were not there. As Anders mentioned, the words were not even there. And we started there from the roots of the UN system rather than at WHO, because UN system embeds the political process of the international community. So how do you get your cause recognized by the international community is by going to the UN. And the way we did it then was to create this NGO committee for rare diseases in 2013, and at the same time, preparing the ground to position rare diseases within the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. So the program was shaping around 2013, 2015, and positioning it in the relevant SDGs and preempting the motto of leaving no one behind as really a sentence that embodies very well the cause of the people living with rare diseases, and going to the UN system and saying, hey guys, you cannot be indifferent to 300 million people out there if you pretend not to leave no one behind. And that indifference, which is lasting since centuries, is a violence. And from the moment that we can do something, we can change that. And the next step was really to promote rare disease within the universal health coverage, which is the main political text of these 15 years of the SDGs in the area of health. And that's a political text for New York. So by having rare disease mentioned explicitly into the coverage as a vulnerable population to cover more services, to reduce out-of-pocket money, it was putting us on the track toward the UN resolution. And concretely, we did it with position papers on universal health coverage and rare diseases. We did it with 2 events, which we organized at the UN, in the UN building, sponsored by some member states. In particular, Estonia has been our champion all along, together with Sweden, with France, with Japan, with Spain, and more countries progressively associated to this action. And then we had in our second event a call for a UN resolution, which was based on key asks developed with our members. So it is based on the homework with the members of Rare Disease International. And then we brought that, and in the third and last event, which was already online during the COVID, we organized an event with 5 member states, which were Spain, Brazil, Qatar, France, and Japan. And the ambassadors expressed themselves on behalf of their country to say, we support that. And then the day after, they formed the core group with Spain, Qatar, and Brazil. And this is how we got started. And the beauty, I think, of that is that that was under the tsunami of COVID, where no other health issue could really be promoted in New York. But there was a lot of goodwill around us. There was the strength of our community, but there was also all the homework, I would say, of networking in New York with the different embassies, permanent mission to the UN system, which were associated to the previous events, which then there was a readiness and a preparedness to go ahead for UN resolution.
Thanks, Jan. You told us how you managed to get the ball rolling, how you positioned rare diseases within the UN system, within their own political agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. But it's a long way from, say, we had 3 or 4 countries to say we officially support it, to getting 54 co-sponsors and then finally everyone adopting it. So Flaminia, tell us how you went from 3 to 54 to 193 countries.
Yes, thank you, Tamsin. So as of mid-2020 and more so since the beginning of 2021, we intensified 2 parallel outreach processes. So one towards the community of persons living with a rare disease and their families worldwide through RDI and EURORDIS membership. And the second process towards UN member states, directly towards the permanent missions of member states in New York. So for the first process, the one towards the community, we developed a campaign made of a box of tools for patient groups. So the campaign is called Resolution for Rare. So there is a toolkit on the website, publicly available. We developed the visual identity of the campaign for our members and other patient groups to use for their national advocacy efforts, including a logo, posts for social media, infographic, an animated cartoon with a journey through life with a rare disease. So we also we launched the Dear UN campaign in the shape of a direct message to the UN. Like we said to patient advocates and patient representatives, what do you want the UN and governments around the world to know about a life with a rare disease? And we received more than 100 testimonies from all over the world, and we made a video for them to use also at their own events and our events. We developed an explanation, what is a UN resolution? And we shared a video for patient groups to explain to national and local levels why a UN resolution is important. The second parallel process directly towards permanent missions in New York. So we firmly positioned the challenges of living with a rare disease within Agenda 2030 of the United Nations by linking these challenges to several SDGs. So access to education, access to employment, gender equality, obviously health and well-being, innovation, reducing inequalities. So as Jan was explaining, we developed 5 key asks. We drafted a resolution. We secured a core group of member states who are the ones who promoted the draft resolution within the UN and led the negotiations with the other member states. And in the end, doing all of this parallel work, we secured more than 50 countries who co-sponsors the resolution.
Thank you so much, Flaminia. It's so interesting to hear your story. I mean, this was a decade in the making and 1 year of really intensive work once you kicked off the campaign. And it's interesting as well to hear how what you managed to do was you went to the member states of the United Nations and made it very clear to them that they could not achieve their own goals, the SDGs, unless they recognize the challenges of people and persons living with rare diseases. So very clever to make it clear to the member states that they couldn't get what they wanted without acknowledging and addressing your challenges. So Duran, let me now ask you, we've got the UN resolution. Where do we go from here? What do we do with it?
Well, thank you very much. As you know, Rare Diseases International is represented in, well over 100 countries. I work a lot with patient organizations on the ground. In addition to being president of the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, I also serve as president of the Asia Pacific Alliance of Rare Disease Organizations. We were recently in Africa to help set up the African Summit, and I spent a lot of time working with the groups in Latin America. And so, we know that on the ground, there's a lot of excitement. Number one, as Flaminia says, a lot of excitement engendered by people being drawn into the campaign. Here's what it means. Here's what you need to do in order to support it. So people were buying in from the very beginning. Actually, we have bought in people very much so from the 2 years before with the universal health coverage and the work with the WHO, the UN, to get rare diseases identified as a distinct population within that. What we know with people living with rare disease is that a lot of it falls onto the family, it falls onto the individual, it falls onto the local groups, and a lot of times people feel like they're working alone. They also feel like they have no right to ask for anything. I mean, when you say, I'm coming in and I'm representing 20 people versus, cancer, which represents the thousands, people are somewhat intimidated. And I think what the universal health coverage with the rare diseases mentioned in it, what the UN resolution does is say, you have a right. You have every much right as anybody else. And quite frankly, you now got, your member state. You've got the UN, you've got all of these international agencies that says, we support you. We're going to be there for you. And it gives people a whole lot more cachet to go in and be able to ask for it. All the work still falls on the people that are there, the families that are there, the local organizations that are there. But what we've done is we've given them a boost. We've given them the opportunity to really be able to go in and to make the case, go into their health centers and say, yes, we together, The world recognizes rare diseases. It's just not a small number. So I think it's given that psychological boost. But more than that, it also provides direct tools. With the universal health coverage, what we bought into was, in fact, a toolkit that was developed for how do you actually identify whether or not universal health coverage is, in fact, being implemented in your country. What do you need to look for? Our job now is to try to translate that into what do you need to see in terms of rare diseases. I think with this UN resolution now bringing in, and we've got people like Jan and Anders and Flaminia who are there banging on those international doors and opening up agreements and looking for ways in which we can have these international agencies, UNESCO, UNICEF, WHO, all working with us, but maybe even beyond that, talking to, the World Bank. What can you do? But all that does is create opportunities. It really is still up to people on the ground. And what this has done, when we, even before it was passed, people kept asking, when is it going to get passed? Is it passed? And when it was passed, it was huge celebration. And that doesn't usually happen. I mean, there's a UN resolution, way up there. Like, what the heck is that going to do for us? People understood it and people felt it. And most of all, they felt like they belonged and that they actually were being acknowledged. I love the fact that we've got the social, the economic, the occupational, because I think what it also said to people, what they've been feeling is that, living with a rare disease isn't just living with a medical condition. It impacts your entire life. It impacts your mental health. And what we've seen on the ground now are a lot more in terms of people addressing and asking for the supports and the tools and the resources to address those needs, because now it actually is much more legitimate for them as well. So I think the UN resolution, even if it's just now being passed and we're still putting the tools together and we're still educating on it, people are anticipating, they're bought in. And it's, for us, I think, the beginning of another, a whole different saga in terms of what we can do for rare diseases. And yes, the world will be different, because it's really, as a parent of two children with rare diseases, you oftentimes are somewhat hesitant to push yourself forward because, you're not cancer, you're not diabetes, you're not heart disease, and now we are there. And we are able to contribute, as I think we can see in this resolution. We're coming to say, we're not just here to ask for anything. What we do note is that what we're innovating, what we're actually activating in rare diseases has resonance right across all the other diseases. And many people know many of these diseases that are common diseases are becoming increasingly rare diseases, genomically defined. So we're going to be the leaders in terms of what is going to be happening, not just in healthcare, but also in terms of all the other sectors that we're talking about. Because I think rare diseases is going to show the world in terms of how to live, not just with a chronic disease, but how to live a really quality life to the fullest possible.
Thank you very much for sharing this amazing story. And like you said, it's been a process that has gone from recognizing that there's this entire UN process out there and rare diseases were nowhere, they were invisible. And you have, through your engagement and mobilizing the base and really energizing them, you have become visible. Not only have you become visible, it's across the entire UN system. So you have legitimacy, as you said, credibility, and this political connection and support that goes from the UN system to the national governments and into the healthcare systems. So I'm really pleased to hear how much of an exciting message it was for all your members. And as you said, Duran, this is the beginning of a journey. Now the thing is, how can you make this resolution into something that is practical and workable in each country and can deliver measurable impact across the range of different areas? So well done, the four of you, for all the hard work, and thank you for your advocacy. To Anders, to Jan, to Flaminia and Duran for sharing your story. Huge achievement of the advocacy of the campaigners, and this is the first step in what will hopefully be a really powerful decade of change for people living with a rare disease. Thank you all.